Friends, I want to apologize if you started watching earlier, but we were a little delayed on some of our technology, so we'll restart and we'll hopefully get you some really good information today. Coming up on this episode of the Steve Beaman Journey, the Fed blinks, Trump comes back from a triumphant trip to Asia, Washington continues to stall as they go through the continuation of the shutdown. But while fear dominates the headlines, independent business owners everywhere stand tall as they quietly build the American dream together. So don't get left behind and stay with me on this Monday, November 3rd, The Financial Journey.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In a world of uncertainty, where business, freedom, and the future hang in the balance, one voice rises with clarity, experience, wisdom, and conviction. This is the Steve Beaman Show, the voice of the independent American.
Welcome back, my friends. And again, I want to thank you for that first hiccup. If you saw this from the beginning, I don't know what happens sometimes, but the technology I use to broadcast to several different distribution sites at once just sometimes does that. But welcome back. What a week we've had. Obviously, it started off on a note with the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates by 25 basis points. I think it's a sign by the Fed that the economy, while doing okay, still needs a little boost. So they were, I think, wise to cut it. Perhaps a little more is in order, but they did at least give us the 25 basis points. And Trump is back from what looks like it was a very successful trip to Asia. His meetings in Malaysia and Japan especially went well. His meeting with President Xi in China, we'll have to see if the Chinese live up to what they say, which would be a rarity. But it does look like he was able to at least get through some of the initial issues that have to do with the tariffs. So hopefully we'll see that play out in the U.S. economy. We are looking, of course, at this issue with the shutdown. Is this going to really create more chaos and strife, or is it going to be resolved? It's funny. Here's my bet, and I would bet you this does come true, that after tomorrow's elections, after that situation in New York, Minneapolis, Virginia, and the other places are resolved, we'll actually see the people come together and the Democrats set up and get this thing closed out and move on. I'm surprised you haven't been able to find 7 traditional Democrats who would support the reopening through this continuing resolution. I know there's some people who are blaming the Republicans, but I think you need to really think hard before you start throwing blame on them. 100% of the Republicans are voting to open the government. 3 of the Democrats. We need, I think, 4 more. So hopefully they can get that done. But, politics, as always, is about kick the can down the road. So my guess is this whole continuing resolution is just more of kicking the can down the road on really solving the problems that have been created by this government. And that's problems with health insurance created by the government, student loans created by the government, and the other things they have to wrestle with. So we'll see if they actually can come together. So for millions of us, this week is almost deja vu. It's the old game of fear, uncertainty, and doubt being played out in the media, trying to keep us down. But here, on this journey, my journey with you, we don't live in fear. We seek to build solutions and find solutions to these problems. Well, today I call this the financial path, and not because it's necessarily about money. In the 5 paths to a transformed life that I talk about so often, the financial path is every bit as much about sovereignty as money. It's about your ability to stand strong when the world shakes, to build when others freeze, and to lead when others follow. Today, as headlines swirl and markets churn, we're going to talk about how you, the independent American, the small business owner or independent business owner, how you can rise above the noise and how you can turn fear into focus and uncertainty into opportunity. Because let's be honest, in the world in which we live today, fear sells. It always has. And they're going to try every way they can to keep you down using fear. Cable news sells fear. Politicians fundraise on fear. And social media amplifies fear 24/7. They have learned what old marketers have known for a very long time. People, all of us, act more quickly out of fear than we do out of hope. That's why every cycle we seem to be told the sky is falling. I mean, let's remember the sky will destroy our way of life. Inflation will eat away your savings. Interest rates will crush your small business. Wars abroad will destroy demand. And politics, well, it will end prosperity. But here's the truth. The truth isn't always as sexy as fear, but it is the truth. America's strength has never come from Washington. It's never come from Wall Street, and it's never come from the media. It always comes from you, the independent Americans who open the doors every morning, meet the payrolls, and keep the real economy alive. I mean, you've heard me say this before, and it's in one of the books I wrote on selling. Nothing happens until a sale is made. And that's all about the heartbeat of capitalism and the heartbeat from you, the independent business owner. It is you, the small business contractor, the self-starter. You are the beating heart of this nation. And that's why, as I see the fear machine in overdrive, I remind people whenever I can, you don't have to be swept up in it. You can be the calm in the midst of a storm. So let's zoom out for a minute and frame this language in the 5 paths that I talk about. That's financial health, emotional, physical, intellectual, and spiritual. These aren't just ideas. They're the coordinates of a complete life. I mean, right now, the financial path you and I travel is being tested. Interest rates fluctuate, credit tightens, consumer confidence wavers. In fact, NFIB's Small Business Confidence Index just came down again. That's a not great sight. So what that does is lead to our emotional path, which is frayed. People are exhausted, they're anxious, they're tired of the chaos. Our physical path is being challenged by the stress and poor habits that drain the energy we need to sustain. And our intellectual path is dulled by the endless noise, information without wisdom. And of course, on the spiritual path, the deepest one of all, well, that suffers when faith gives way to fear. When any of these paths breaks down, well, the others wobble. Think of them as legs to a stool. Pull 1 out, you're fine. 2 out, you're a little less stable. 3 out, you're in real trouble. So we don't want to see a situation in which a person's life has 3 of the 5 paths out of sync. And that's why when I talk about the financial path, you can't build prosperity alone. A stable financial path requires emotional resilience, intellectual clarity, physical energy, and indeed spiritual grounding. If you're the independent business person, every one of you already know this. This isn't preaching something that hasn't been well known for years. Every sale, every payroll, every risk you've taken requires you to be standing on all 5 legs of that stool. Courage, as you know, without knowledge fails. Knowledge without purpose burns out. And purpose without faith collapses. And that's why this journey exists. It's why I've devoted my life to serving you, the independent American, because I want to reconnect those paths so you can live, lead, and prosper with balance and strength. But let's come back for a minute to the Fed's rate cut, because you might be wondering, as we so often talk about, what does that do for you? I mean, for Wall Street, it's a party, right? For Washington, it's a headline. But for Main Street, I guess the best way to put it is to say it's a reminder that the system is still uncertain. Even the experts are guessing their way through what is a seemingly fragile recovery. We've yet to determine the real effect of the tariffs on the economy. They don't seem to be hurting it, but clearly they're starting to slow things down. But with all of that said, this is exactly where you can win. When big institutions freeze, Small independents adapt. When bureaucracies stall, entrepreneurs move. And when the herd waits for direction, you in the independent business world lead with action. Because you see, in every downturn, every moment of chaos, new fortunes are built, for sure. Not by those who hide, but by those who see clearly. You can't control the Fed, but you can control your cash flows, right? You can't reopen Washington, but you can reopen your imagination. You can't predict policy out of these Washington people, but you can predict your own efforts. So the choice that we make as independent business people today is simple. You can be paralyzed by fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or you can be prepared through enhanced literacy in all of these levels. Because literacy, financial, intellectual, and moral, is what separates those who survive from those who lead. I mean, remember, I wrote in The Path to Prosperity years ago, hard work is the down payment to every breakthrough. Well, that's true, and it's an antidote to uncertainty. Not panic, not politics, not dependence. Just preparation, discipline, and as Ray Kroc so famously said, perseverance. So as this week unfolds and the headlines rage, well, remember with me that you're not alone. You're not the audience of this drama. You're the author of your own story, and the pen to that story is in your hand. So this is, as always, the Steve Beaman journey, and I travel it with you each and every day on one of the different paths. Hope you enjoy it, and I welcome your questions to steve@stevebeaman.com. I do my very best to bring you insights that can help you with what I think of as living insights for everyday living. So I hope they are helpful to you. But as we come back, we've talked about fear, how it spreads, how it sells, and how it can stop you if you let it. But before I get started on more of the financial path, I feel obligated to talk about New York and the Mandami situation. I cannot express clearly enough in this short podcast how dangerous this person and his ideology are. First and foremost, and you've heard me say this, or at least many of you have, I know socialism firsthand. It was in the early 1990s that I escorted Soviet personnel throughout the United States. These were communists through and through. They believed the state had to be the ultimate control person of capital, the ultimate control of mechanisms and flow of capital, wages, benefits, and all the resources, all in the interest of equity. What blew their minds, though, and this is a truth, what blew their minds was to walk into an American grocery store. I mean, let's talk about how appropriate that is, as Mandami has talked about putting state-run grocery stores in play. Well, I find it interesting because the Soviets knew their shelves were largely empty. The distribution system they had, the agricultural system, the packaging systems, none of these were up to speed. None of them worked efficiently. None of them gave the kind of quality of life that an American grocery store enjoys. In a state-controlled system like the Soviet Union or Mandami's New York, government bureaucrats decide, of course, what should be grown, what should be distributed, and ultimately what should be shown on the shelf. Well, the problem with that, I don't care how smart a bureaucrat is, they cannot in any way replicate the wisdom of the desires and the demands of 100 million people in a voluntary marketplace. There's no way they can do it. In this country in the 70s, we tried wage and price controls. Dick Cheney, and you can love him or hate him, but he wrote in his book that how he used to sit in a room with some of the bureaucrats in the White House and they'd decide corn prices for the day. Well, how the heck do they know what corn prices should be? It is the magic and the miracle of the free enterprise system that allows hundreds of millions of people to compete each and every day in that marketplace that effectively sets prices. And, at the beginning of my journey with these people, every one of them believed that the state having control would lead to more efficiency. Makes sense. If you only produce one type of cereal, I mean, what could be more efficient? It has to be more efficient than producing 100 types, right? So we decide you need cornflakes. So we just go out and build cornflakes. You don't need Fruit Loops and all the others. Well, what they learned, and again through what is a wonderful, magical, and invisible hand, the marketplace. And that marketplace is where millions of people come together and vote with their money, and the businesses compete for that vote because that in itself creates overwhelming supply, competitive low prices, and incredibly high quality. Find the scale of an American grocery store anywhere else in the world. You can't. It doesn't exist. Our free markets have built the best agriculture, best manufacturing, best packaging, best distribution, and best retailing of any system ever known on the planet. I mean, Americans complain about inflation, and rightfully so. They talk about, high prices. But don't blame the system. Put the blame where it belongs. It's your government at work. They're the ones who devalue your currency regularly. I mean, if New Yorkers really want communism and Mandami, this is something, by the way, I wrote, Mandami calls himself a democratic socialist. I wrote an article that's been widely published talking about how there's no such thing as a democratic socialist. It doesn't exist. The reason for that, a democracy can elect a socialist, but socialism cannot exist within democracy because socialism destroys freedom and liberty. It demands people perform work so that others can have goods. And that's where the inefficiencies lie. I hope at some point people will quit electing people who try to sell you these utopias. They don't work. If Mandami has grocery stores, you can expect empty shelves, no differently than they have in North Korea, Venezuela, or Cuba. They had them in the Soviet Union, and it was the most developed of the socialist utopias. They had empty shelves because that system doesn't reward individual activity. It doesn't reward individual innovation. It doesn't have an entrepreneurial class. The American experiment in free enterprise and liberty has given us that. We need that to sustain for the next generations. And I want to say this. You guys need to not vote for these utopian dreamers. And especially I want to talk to the people who get SNAP benefits. I mean, I feel for you. I truly do. You've traded your individual sovereignty for a government security blanket. Now, you might say I had no choice in doing that, and I get it. Some people are forced into SNAP, there's no question. And I don't blame you for taking those benefits. That's highly rational short-term behavior. But look what you've done to yourself. You've given control of your food supply to the government. And look what happens then. The dysfunctional government stops paying the bill. They hold you hostage. So the only question I have is, are you surprised? When you give up any liberty to the government, it's up to that government then to sustain it. Governments don't do that very well because governments aren't out to serve you. They're out to serve themselves. And I think we have enough history that's proven that point. So I guess, why are you surprised? When in the history of the world could anyone trust a government to give them benefits? Have to understand that the government, in order to give you a benefit, has to take it from somewhere else. Government is zero sum. They don't give what they don't have. And there's two ways they get money to give you those benefits. They either tax people, and I know you all say tax the millionaires and billionaires, but I've shown you in other podcasts there's not enough money there. So what happens? The government can't raise taxes enough to give those benefits, so they inflate. Inflation is the ugly tax that hurts everybody. And don't misunderstand that. Inflation is a tax. It simply is a tax paid every time you go shopping, whether it's for a Coca-Cola or a Big Mac or a gallon of gas. You're paying that tax due to government mismanagement of the economy. So I urge people, especially those who've trusted the government to provide for their food, to rethink things. Government is not your friend. I guarantee you that Mandami won't live under the same financial structure that he forces you to live under. His family's wealthy. And just like the Politburo in the Soviet Union was wealthy, it has been accurately said that capitalism is the unequal distribution of wealth. Socialism is the equal distribution of poverty. And socialism and communism are cousins. Don't ever mistake that. Again, you talk about Scandinavian. People always say, well, look at the Scandinavian countries. They have said very strongly they are not socialist. These are capitalist countries with relatively high tax burdens. Okay, we can live with that because the taxes can be decided by a free people. But when you start to get the government's control of resources like Mandami wants through rent controls, which will stifle supply, or again, public-owned grocery stores, which will create food deserts that have the likes of which have never been seen in New York, all of that will happen under him. But when you look at the tax rates, and take a look at the Scandinavian countries versus the U.S., all-in spending in the Scandinavian countries runs about 45% of their GDP. In the U.S., we run about 40%. We're not a whole lot different. They're a little bit higher. Now, the difference is we run a big deficit. Most of them run smaller deficits. So we're spending the money. We're just borrowing it because, hey, if you're a politician, why not kick the can down the road a little bit? So what can you do about it? I mean, I could go on about this all day because Mandami is the scariest thing I've seen. The guy in Minneapolis is even worse. But Mandami's push toward Marxism and communism in New York City will be a disaster. Again, this is November 3rd, 2025. Remember this. I'm not the only one saying it. A lot of people are. But if he gets in and gets his policies implemented, New York will become like Escape from New York, the old Kurt Russell movie from years ago. We'll be looking for that kind of stuff. It's just sick and it's sad, and you can't vote for this guy. I urge you not to. But let's look at the positive things. Let's look at 5 things you can do right now to enhance your financial journey. First, start by getting clear on your foundation. Prosperity will never be built in a panic. It's built on principle. So that means knowing your numbers, not guessing, not hoping, but knowing. And let me tell you, when you talk about what your real revenues are and your real costs and your real margin, I will tell you, I am the first one to look at myself and say, I wished I had done that better in some of my businesses. Where I've made big mistakes, it's because I trusted others to look at those numbers. Well, you have to know your numbers intimately well. And if you don't, you're flying blind, and fear loves the dark. Now, second, control what you can and ignore what you can't. You can't change the Fed, you can't change the government, but you can tighten your expenses. You may not be able to reopen Washington, but you can reopen a new network of people. You can pick up the phone and call clients and reconnect. The antidote to uncertainty is action. And I'm reminded of an old story about a guy who lost his biggest client. So he walks into the room with his salesman and he gives them all plane tickets and said, we're going to go reconnect with our customers. Now is a really good time for you to reach out to your customers because they're feeling the same fear, uncertainty, and doubt that you are. Be there for your customers to help solve their problems, and that will pay you back in spades. The third thing is to innovate. In every shift that you see in the economy, there's an opening. It may be a new product line, a new partnership, or leveraging a new technology somehow. So don't be afraid of technology. Don't be afraid of AI. Embrace it. These aren't here to replace you. As an innovator, they're simply here to empower you. And remember, independent business people who don't embrace technology, well, they're not going to survive, let alone scale. So you have to make technology your friend. Fourth, strengthen your mind. The intellectual path that we talk about isn't optional. Read, learn, challenge your assumptions. Because in a world where the average person scrolls for 6 hours a day, thinking deeply has become a competitive advantage. And again, when I talk to you about these things, this is a journey I'm on. And these are lessons I've learned in my life. When I look back to my business successes and my business failures, the biggest, failure teaches the biggest lesson sometimes. And thinking sometimes is a competitive advantage that I've ignored. Fifth and finally today, remember your purpose. The spiritual path isn't a Sunday concept. It's the center of daily life. Faith in God, faith in freedom, faith in your own abilities, that's what steadies you when everything else feels shaky. I often tell people, you are not the victim of an economy. You are the economy. Every time you sell a service, every time you hire an employee or mentor a younger person, you're rebuilding America from the ground up. You're providing the independence that still works. Now, the system will always try to make you a dependent. Subsidies, safety nets, someone else's approval. But dependency is the slow death of initiative. So don't trade your self-reliance for security. And if you do that, you've already been left behind. This new digital age that we talk about so frequently is moving fast, much faster than Washington can regulate, faster than academia can teach, and faster than legacy corporations can adapt. Well, that's your advantage. You can pivot overnight. You can test, learn, and grow while the giants are still in meetings. I'm reminded of the movie Ford versus Ferrari. If you've seen that movie, you remember a scene where they're meeting in Henry Ford's office. And Carroll Shelby comes in and they're talking about why they failed in this race. And Shelby makes the appropriate point that winning a race can't be done by committee. It's done by one person, a person in charge. Well, that's your advantage. You have it over the big guys because you have the power of being nimble in a very fast-changing world. So don't get left behind waiting for some government bureaucrat to give you permission. Run forward with your dreams. Give yourself permission to lead. So yes, today, times are challenging for some. They're opportunistic, but they're a little bit scary. They do give some fear and uncertainty. Margins can be real thin, especially with the tariffs where they are. And the news, well, it's loud like it always is. But remember, America's greatest moments are always born in certainty. Pioneers didn't have guarantees. The founders, they didn't have any security. The entrepreneurs of every generation have faced chaos and built through it. So take a breath, square your shoulders, and remember who you are. A free person in a free country, capable of creating value out of nothing more than an idea and a little faith. That is the American dream, and that's not dead. It's just waiting for all of us to wake up. So remember, fear is contagious, but so can be faith. One will shrink your world, one will expand it. One will say, wait and see, while the other says, build and believe. Today, choose the contagion you spread, because your example, your courage, your success will remind others that independence and sovereignty still work. Let's remember the financial path isn't about dollars and cents. It's about dignity and sense, common sense, moral sense, and the sense to see that you were made to lead. So as we close today's journey, remember you are not behind, you are not forgotten, and you are not alone. You're part of a movement of independent Americans who believe faith, freedom, and literacy still matter. So go lead. Don't get left behind. I thank you, as I always do, for having you watch me today as we travel this financial path, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow as we travel down the emotional path, as we look to find ways to become the attitude of a winner. So stay strong, stay free, and stay sovereign, and God bless you.